Good morning and welcome back to Fanatical Leica. Today I'm going to talk about two 50mm lenses, namely the 50mm f1.4 Summilux M, a spherical, and then the 50mm f2.8 Elmar-M collapsible. These are both two lenses that I use a lot and am very fond of, and I'll show you when I might choose one over the other and go through some sample images. Hopefully this might be useful if you're trying to decide on a 50mm lens for your M camera or SL camera, as I use both of these adapted to the SL for closer focusing and other situations. Anyway, let's get into it. So here are the two lenses in question. First, the 50mm Summilux 1.4 with its extendable hood. I will give you some better close-up images of these to look at as well. And then secondly, let's see if we can achieve focus here, 50mm f2.8 collapsible Elmar-M. And I think it's best that we look at these up close to see the details of what makes these different beyond just their minimum f-stop. Okay, so first I wanted to show these two lenses side by side so you can get a sense of their relative size. Now this is with the optional hood attached to the Elmar and with the hood on the Summilux fully extended. If I rotate them, you can see, and I'll line up their mounting flanges. The Summilux is significantly longer and wider throughout. The real difference, just in terms of form factor, comes into play when you, I'll set this one aside for a moment, when you remove the hood from the Elmar and collapse it. Now, before I collapse it, I just want to make a note that I have a green rubber O-ring attached to the barrel of the lens. This is because this lens retracts so deep into the camera that without it, I was pretty sure I could feel it when I very first tested it very carefully and nervously, touching either the shutter curtain or part of the inner light baffle of the M11. So my solution was to put an O-ring, and this is not my idea, this has been done by many other people, but I found a appropriately sized O-ring, mounted that over the barrel, and so now that when I collapse it, it does not collapse fully. There's about I think it's 2mm gap, but that still makes this lens very compact when it's collapsed, and there's no danger of damaging any of the innards of your precious camera. So again, this one is f2.8. It has half-stop clicks up to f16, if we can see that, and a minimum focusing distance of 0.7 meters. Let's see if we get that in focus. Now, over to the Summilux. With the hood collapsed, it is much shorter, and obviously this goes down to 1.4 for glorious low light performance. It also focuses to a minimum of 0.7 meters, and it's a heftier lens, and it's as far as I'm concerned, a work of art. The Elmar has a push-on metal cap, and frankly, one of the only things I don't like about the Summilux is the lens cap. Now this is the original Leica snap-on cap, which, you collapse the hood, it fits the filter thread, but it leaves sort of an ugly gap, like it's sitting very proud of the filter. It sort of lines up if you slightly extend the hood, but honestly, I wish that there was a push-on cap that covered the outer diameter of the lens hood. Like a felt-lined push-on cap would be a better solution. I've heard that there are some in the works. I haven't found a good third-party one that was a proper fit for it. By the way, just behind these lenses are some prototypes of rope straps for the Leica that I'm making, which I will get into in another episode, but I'm hoping to have some of those in production to possibly sell in the near future. Okay, so here I've got the Elmar mounted on the M11P, and if you look at it from its side profile, with the lens collapsed, it is quite compact front to back, and this would fit in a very small camera bag now, or even under your coat or something if you're in a situation where it's either raining or you don't want to be seen holding a camera. It really very stealthy. Extending the lens and then locking it into place, we can see that increases the length, significantly. It's still quite narrow, but you're not saving on as much space this way. This lens does not have any type of focusing tab or focusing lock. This is the later Elmar-M collapsible. There's an earlier one that I believe has an old style focusing tab, but you can tell from the type of machining on the barrel and that this is a later, more modern Leica M lens. And then here we have what is probably my favorite shooting combination of all time, which is the M camera, any M camera with the 50mm Summilux. It's just it's such a gorgeous lens. The weight is balanced perfectly when I'm carrying it. It doesn't tilt down or feel heavy, and the lens hood design is just what it needs. It's not fancy, but it covers the focal length just right. Okay, so for our test images, I've just made this little pyramid out of bags and with some climbing rope on top, and I'm going to be focusing right around here, where the rope and the bags meet, because there's a lot of fine stitching detail on the ropes, as well as grain on the leather that I'm hoping we can resolve. So I'm going to switch over to the other cameras, take some test images, and we'll be right back. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and I've loaded sample images. I shot these at two distances, first at 4 feet from the test subject, and then again at 2 feet using the close focus helicoid on my SL or M to SL adapter. So first we're going to look at the one shot at 4 feet. Now right now we're looking at the Elmar on the left and the Summilux on the right. These are both at 2.8, which is the maximum f-stop or the minimum f-stop for the Elmar. And we'll look at the Summilux wide open in just a moment. But at f2.8, they look nearly identical to me. I will zoom out and then zoom into corner over here. And in terms of color rendition, resolution, even the bokeh is very similar. It seems to be a slightly tighter pattern on the Elmar compared to the Summilux. These look slightly larger to me, which is interesting. But even the in-focus to out-of-focus transition, say from, again, we're not looking at the focal plane here, but looking at the weaving pattern on the bag, and then the top of the bag where it starts to come into focus. And there's the same little bit of fringing there on both lenses. And at 100% in the center, I'd be very hard pressed to tell the difference between these two. Jumping up to f4 on both lenses. Let's have a look again in the center. And we see the background starting to come into focus a little bit more. It does look a little softer on the Summilux to me, just ever so slightly. And we see more of the rope in focus, and I feel like it resolves the fibers in this up here better. Let's have a look down in the corner at this strap again. And again, looking a little bit sharper, but similar fall off along this area of the bag. And bokeh is looking much more similar to me. I'd say it's a little more contrasty on the Summilux right now, This looks more sort of even across these two highlights, where these look a little more defined to me, but that is a very, very subtle difference. See if we see anything down here that's of note. I see, again, a little bit of fringing. This is sort of in that violet magenta, but looks nearly identical on both lenses. And we will jump up to f5.6 on both and have a zoom in to the center. Now it's starting to look a lot sharper across the top of the bag here, tightening up the background. Again, very hard pressed to tell the difference between the two. Let's look at the corner down here. We're starting to see more of the pattern of the fabric of this couch and stitches coming into focus. Again, color rendition, I haven't applied any adjustments to any of these. There may be some slight variation in brightness just depending on the particular copy of the lens, but it seems like a lot of that fringing is gone. Let's take a look down here. Yeah, I mean, as we get more into focus, there's less fringing because there's less of the sort of bokeh area. And back to the center. So that's 2, 8, 4, 5, 6. So let's jump into f8 on each of them. And I apologize for these both being darker. I think I just adjusted shutter speed incorrectly between them, but they're both more or less the same. I think the difference is the same on each image. So in the center, now we're getting more detail on this wall in the back, but again, it looks like a similar amount between both lenses. I'd say it's a little bit sharper, or maybe it's just more contrasty on the Summilux, which is sort of what we saw in the bokeh of those earlier ones at f2.8. But otherwise looks, nearly identical. And similar story down here. Yeah, and down in this corner, we're starting to see this stuff come into focus. It looks like that fringing is gone by this point. And back to the center. So let's look at f11. And now we have an image that's much sharper throughout. The back wall is coming into focus. Most of the ropes are in focus. We can see a lot of detail. I'm curious if we zoom in a little bit further still what we get. But we're really pushing the limits of the resolution of the sensor at this point. So let's go back to 100% and then down to this corner. And lots of detail. It's funny, at f11 for whatever reason, and it may just be the exposure difference, but the Elmar seems to have a little more saturation here than the Summilux does, but splitting hairs to be sure. And that's the bottom left corner. So again, back to the center at 100% is what we're seeing. Just for kicks, let's look at f16 on both and see if we see any diffraction creeping in. I would say that this is ever so slightly softer, but it's certainly a very usable image. This is actually the first time I've really shot at f16 with either of these lenses. I tend to avoid it because I'm wary of diffraction, but I'm actually quite impressed by both of them. I wouldn't now hesitate. It might be different in very bright light, but this was a very brightly lit room. I was trying to get as much light into the scene as possible so I could shoot at a reasonable ISO, and it seems to have handled it very well. Oh, I think I bumped. Did I bump that? I did. Okay, we're back at f16. So, all right, let's really quick have a look at the Summilux at f1.4. just so you can see how that compares to f2.8 on the Elmar. So not apples to apples here, but it's a very different image on the Summilux wide open. It's a bit glowy, you know, especially around these rubber bands here. There's that slight bit of a halo, and I feel like I'm seeing a little bit of green creep into it. Let's look at the bottom corner here. I'm trying to find an area with significant bokeh, and we see this, you know, cat's eye effect really pronounced on these rivets. And I like the look of it. I find it very, very pleasing. Let's find another sort of out of focus area. And it's just a bit hazier, but you know, the focal plane is obviously much narrower. We have a lot less depth of field to work with, but where it's sharp, back in the center, it's very sharp. I mean, I feel like I can see individual strands in the weaving of this rope, and it's very definitely in focus. There's a lot more vignetting going on here at 1.4, which obviously you can correct for, or maybe that enhances your image depending on what you're shooting. So I'm going to jump over to the closer images, which were shot at a distance of 2 feet. So give me 1 second. Okay, so you'll have to pardon my ignorance of Lightroom controls, but right now we're going to be looking at the Summilux on the left hand and the Elmar on the right. And maybe it's good for us to switch it up so it removes any kind of experimental bias. But this is both of the lenses at f2.8 at a distance of 2 feet. The lens itself was focused to 3.5 feet, so not at its true minimum focus, and then using the helicoid on the close focus adapter, the M-L adapter, I brought the image into focus. You can get much finer adjustment on the focus with that, and maybe it's more representative of an actual real-world situation where you don't necessarily have your M lens focused to its absolute minimum. You may be slightly away from that. Anyway, that was my theory. We'll see how it holds up. But let's jump into 100% and look where we're really in focus. And again, so this is at 2.8. Summilux on the left and Elmar on the right. And I'm seeing a little more green in the out of focus image on the Elmar than I am on the Summilux. Let's for kicks, let's see if we bring the Summilux image to f1.4 and how that looks in its out of focus range. So again, it gets much more glowy, and there is some coloration, you know, some fringing in that, but nothing crazy. So this is back to 2.8 on both images, and have a look at the corners and see if we can see what the, so I don't really have any, there's a little bit of bokeh ball going on here, and you can judge for yourself if one is better than the other. It's ever so small a difference. So let's move up to f4 for both of these. You know, similar story. I'm not seeing a ton of difference between the two different focal distances, so I won't spend a crazy amount of time on this, but let's maybe jump up to f8. So there's the Summilux, and then here's the Elmar, both at f8. And I feel like I see more contrast again with the Summilux here. And let's have a look down at the strap over here. Summilux seems to be a little sharper in the corner here, but hopefully that's what you pay for when you get a Summilux versus an Elmar. All right, and then let's jump to f16. Oh, let's see 11 real quick. So 11 and 11. So our background is much sharper. And again, these look, at least in the center of the image, very, very similar. I'd say slightly more contrasty on the Summilux, Let's look at the detail on this strap in the corner. Yes, much sharper on the Summilux when we get to the absolute corner, and that's actually an area in focus, whereas there's just not that kind of resolution with the Elmar. And then f16, let's see how much, if any, diffraction we see. So back to the center. It maybe softens up just a little bit, but again, I think well within the range of acceptable use, in a controlled lighting situation. And in the corner, yeah, it's maybe not quite as tack sharp on the Summilux as it was in the previous image, but that's where we're at. And we'll jump back to some final thoughts. Okay, so you win a prize if you stuck around this long, but I wanted to really take some time and go through each image and allow you to do the same. I think they're both fantastic lenses. I use them both a lot and really enjoy them and the images that are produced with them. So hopefully this is helpful if you're considering either of them, and feel free to leave a comment or hit me up with a question if you want to talk more about them. Until next time.
Thank you.